everyone, welcome back. My name is Diana. This is my channel Bookish Di, and today I'm recapping my July in reading. So July overall was a pretty good month for me reading wise, probably because on the second to last day of the month I ended up starting and finishing 2 books and then finishing a 3rd book that I had started many months ago. So I ended up reading 9 books total, and for the most part enjoyed a lot of what I read. I do have some quibbles about certain things, but for the most part very good, very enjoyable. And yeah, I'm about to get crashed by one of my cats. Hold on, let's see if he actually shows up. Come on, little guy. Come on. I know you want. No, he's not going to. Anyway, let's get into it. The first book that I read in the month of July was Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. This is a science... Oh, there he is. Say hello to your fans. Anyway, so I read Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. This is a science fantasy novel focusing on 3 main characters. The first one is Shizuka Satomi, who is a violin teacher who made a deal with a demon to give them the souls of 7 students, and her deal finally is almost up. She needs 1 more soul, and she's trying to find the right one when she stumbles upon Katrina Nguyen, who is a young trans runaway who is playing the violin and has this kind of wild, untapped talent that draws in Shizuka. And then the third main point of view character is an alien refugee who, along with her family, are running a donut shop, and that is Lan Tran. So those 3 characters, their fates kind of intertwine with each other as Shizuka starts teaching Katrina, who starts to kind of figure herself out in a non-abusive environment, and Shizuka and Lan fall in love and are dealing with each with their own issues. So yeah, content warning with this one for sexual abuse, sex work, abuse, and transphobia. This is a very warm-hearted story, but there is some dark content in here. So if you can tell, I really like this book. This is currently up for Hugo for Best Novel, and I had some friends who really enjoyed it, and so I got it last year and hadn't gotten around to reading it, so I finally did, and I'm really glad, because this was just kind of, like I said, there are some dark themes in here, but overall it's a very hopeful, very warm story. I really liked the relationships between the 3 main characters, along with some secondary characters. So you have Astrid, who is Shizuka's housekeeper, who kind of becomes like this surrogate big sister / maternal figure to Katrina. You have Lan's kids and what they're going through. You also have like this violin maker. So there's a number of different characters. It can get a little overwhelming at times, especially because sometimes the points of view switch rather suddenly. But in terms of the main 3 characters, I really liked them. I liked how distinctive they felt in the text and how each of them are going through their own issues, but as they start to open up to one another, as they start to figure out how much they care about each other, how much they, love each other both in a romantic way and a non-romantic way. It was just very, very nice and uplifting, and I really enjoyed this. I don't know what else the author has put out, but I definitely would be interested in reading more from her. This was such a lovely book. I'm really glad I read it. I think I gave it like a 4.25 out of 5 stars. There were just some, the points of view shifting. It was a little overwhelming, especially at the beginning when all the characters are being established, but by the end of it, I really liked it. So I'd really recommend this. If you're looking for something that reads a little different, that overall is a really hopeful book, that has just a warm center, even when it's dealing with dark shit, would recommend overall. The second book that I read in July was a nonfiction book. It was Rogues, True Stories of Grifters, Killers, Rebels, and Cooks by Patrick Radden Keefe. This is his new nonfiction collection of long form reporting that he did for The New Yorker for a number of years. So I think the earliest piece is from the early 2000s. And so this covers a wide range of topics. You have him kind of going into the wine counterfeiting trade, which, side note, anyone who can afford to spend thousands of dollars on historical wines, and I apologize if you can hear yard work being done. I might have to pause until this person stops. Anyway, if you can spend thousands of dollars on historical wine, you deserve to be scammed out of that money, because holy shit, no, like, really? You're spending money on that? Anyway, but you also have his profile on the capture of El Chapo. You have him going into a woman who, a professor at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, and her history leading up to her shooting her colleagues. There's a number of different pieces here. I really enjoyed it, particularly the final essay, which is a profile on Anthony Bourdain. This was published in, like, I think 2016, 2017. And it was just really it was difficult to read, because he died by suicide a few years ago, and he was just this person who really loved traveling, loved experiencing other cultures and sharing that with everyone else, and just getting to see what he was like, that snapshot in time and just what was going on with him was just really affecting. And one of the things in particular that was interesting is there's little short descriptions at the end of each piece, kind of updating what's happening with the main subject. And so updating what happened, you know, with Anthony Bourdain, with El Chapo. So it was overall very interesting collection. I really like Patrick Radden-Keefe's writing. He wrote one of my favorite books, Say Nothing, as well as Empire of Pain, which I read last year. So if you like his writing, if you're interested in more like short form pieces, I would really recommend this. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Enjoyable. Not my favorite Radden-Keefe, but you know, still up there. Next was another nonfiction book. This was How to Survive a Plague, The Inside Story of How Citizens and Science Tamed AIDS by David France. This is a longer adaptation of a documentary that he did several years, like 10 years ago now. And it's basically about the earlier days of AIDS and the founding of ACT UP, which was an organization that was really pushing the government and drug makers to investigate new drugs to help treat and prevent AIDS, as well as make sure that they were affordable for people who needed the drugs. Because one of the things that gets discussed is one of the early AIDS treatment drugs, AZT, was initially priced at like $10,000 a year, which is completely unsustainable, especially for low income folks. So yeah, so this was really interesting. This took me about a month to read, just because it was very heavy. So I think this book works really well as a counterpart to And the Band Played On by Randy Schultz, because they're both capturing early days of the AIDS epidemic, but they're taking different paths to it. And And the Band Played On is very much a journalistic piece. It's very much kind of reporting the facts, reporting what's happening. And it also has more of a West Coast focus, which makes sense because Randy Schultz was based in San Francisco, and I believe he worked for the San Francisco Chronicle when he was working on this book. And it also ends much earlier because it was published in '87, and Randy Schultz either died shortly before it was published or shortly after it was published. I can't remember. So there's very much like a hard stop for what was covered in that book, even in the 20th anniversary edition, which came out like a decade ago. Whereas this book, it does initially cover that same early period, but it's done differently. It's more focused on the East Coast because David France was living in New York City at the time. It also is partially a memoir because we get France's perspective as to what was going on, what was he doing at the time, what his thoughts were as his friends and lovers became sick and died. And, you know, he was trying to survive a plague. And then he gets into kind of the foundation of ACT UP, the politics behind it, what they accomplished, how they kind of fell apart. So yeah, it was a very good book, a very heavy book. And like I said, I would really recommend reading this in conjunction with And the Band Played On, because I think they are taking different approaches to a similar topic. And I think it gives you a really good perspective into what was happening at the time. The other thing I would say with this book is I think it's important to read up about the AIDS epidemic, especially now when we've seen kind of the failure of scientific communication on the part of the CDC in regards to COVID, but as well as monkeypox, and how the way they're going about it is going to get people killed, even more so than they have already. So I think in terms of knowing your history and knowing why people are like, dude, what the fuck, in regards to how the CDC is currently messaging things, this is really essential. I think it also helps explain some of the process for what goes on with drug development. And the other thing, and I can't believe I forgot to mention this until now, that was very interesting with this book is the role that Anthony Fauci plays in the history of the HIV/AIDS epidemic and what was going on with his role in the NIH. So yeah, I would be very interested to see someone kind of dig more into that, because I think, especially like in conjunction to his role with COVID, I don't know, a lot of thoughts, not really articulating them all. Anyway, really enjoyed this, very heavy book, but overall very well written. I gave it 5 out of 5, would recommend it for folks. After that heavy topic, I needed something a bit lighter, and I read A Master of Jinn by P. Djeli Clark. This is set in his Dead Jinn universe. So this was Dead Jinn in Cairo, Haunting of Tramcar 15, and then Master of Jinn. This follows Agent Fatma, I can't remember, El Sha'awari, who is an agent in the Ministry of Alchemy, Enchantments, and Supernatural Entities, who investigates magical shenanigans in the city of Cairo. This is an alternate history where a Sudanese mystic opened up a portal between Earth and the mystical realms, and jinn and these entities that call themselves angels and other magical creatures came through. And so everything kicks off when a mystical society dedicated to, or a secret society dedicated to the mystic, is killed in a magical attack, and Fatma and her new partner, who is, I cannot remember her name, one moment, Hadia. So Fatma and Hadia are assigned to investigate, and yeah, so for the most part, I did enjoy this. There were some parts where I thought it dragged a little, because this is, you know, almost 400 pages, and it is Clark's first full-length novel. So I think there was kind of a transition from being more of a short-form writer to being a long-form writer. However, I really enjoy the world building in this series. I think thinking through how the appearance of jinn in Egypt would affect things. So it's not very much like, oh, there's magic, but everything's the same. It's like, no, it's very different. So Egypt is independent. A lot of Africa was able to resist colonization efforts. England is kind of in decline. You still have tensions between European powers, but it's on a much different scale than what actually happened in the lead up to World War I, because this takes place in 1912. So a couple of years before World War I happened in our universe. You also have more characters being introduced. So you have Fatma, who we followed in a dungeon in Cairo, and now she has a partner, Hadia, who Fatma doesn't initially know how to deal with, because she normally works alone. And so part of it is Fatma learning how to be a partner and be kind of a mentor to Hadia, as well as them figuring out their strengths and how to play to them. So I did enjoy this. I think I would give this 4 stars, like 3.75 to 4 stars out of 5. There are some wonky pacing issues, but for the most part, really great world building, great characters. And just, I'm really interested to see what happens next in this universe, because there's definitely potential for a whole number of different stories here. Next, I read a book which for some reason I thought was actually coming out in July, but technically it's not out till August. But thank you, Fairy Loot. And that is The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Marie Bannon. This is the Fairy Loot Adult Box Edition that has really pretty sprayed edges, that has illustrated end papers and foil cover. So this is essentially a You Got Mail inspired romantic fantasy that's set in like this Western inspired world, and it follows a marshal named Hart. Cannot remember his last name. Anyway, Hart, who is patrolling this kind of magical land, and anytime he finds a dead body that doesn't have any identification, he has to take it to an undertaker to be prepared for burial. And then you have Mercy, who is the daughter of one of the undertakers and has kind of taken over his business unofficially while she's waiting for her younger brother to finish college so he can take over. And they don't like each other, except they start writing to an anonymous friend, and it turns out that friend is each other, and they start developing feelings for their anonymous friend, and oh no, they start falling in love. So this one I really enjoyed. This is like, it's so hard, like the setting is very distinct. So there are certain things that are like our world but aren't. So they have like gamophones and radios, but they also call cars auto ducks. And then they have sea polo and like aquatic horse. It's like a very weird world building, but it worked. Like once you kind of like get into it, it just really works. I really liked the characters in this as well. So in addition to Hart and Mercy, you have Mercy's family, you have her father, her older sister, her younger brother. You have Penn and you have Hart's mentee Penn, who ends up falling in love with Mercy's younger brother. You have some other characters as well. So I really liked the characters. I thought the world building was great. The pacing was a little off. I would have liked, so if you know You Got Mail, or those types of stories, one person finds out the identity of the friend before the other, and I would have liked a little bit less time with the setup and more time with them like dealing with their romance. Because yeah, so the pacing was a little off. But I did feel things. This is like a true romance in that it has a happily ever after. So when things do get bleak here, don't worry, there is an HEA. But yeah, this was fun. This is what I wanted in terms of like a fun, slightly spicy read. I liked the characters, I liked the world. I'd be really interested to see if Bannon does more with this. Because this is her first adult book. So overall, like 3.75 to 4 stars, just a lot of fun. I'm gonna do a full review, I think, for this a little bit closer to release date. And so yeah, pick it up when it comes out. Following that, I went back to nonfiction and I read Maladies of Empire, How Colonialism, Slavery, and War Transformed Medicine by Jim Downs. This is a nonfiction scientific history that kind of takes a different approach to epidemiological history. So kind of what a lot of us think about, a lot of, you know, lay people as well as epidemiologists think about when they think of the start of it is, you know, Jon Snow and the cholera outbreak and him removing the handle to the water pump and figuring it out. Where Jim Downs, on the other hand, argues that a lot of the foundations for epidemiology and public health are intrinsically tied to colonial history, war, and slavery. So he talks about how a lot of the innovations with ventilation and fresh air came from doctors on slave ships observing the conditions that newly enslaved people were being held in, where there was no air, very little room to move, and seeing how that affected them and how many people were dying, or how they were observing how these enslaved people were dealing with scurvy, or with war, how Florence Nightingale's experiences in the Crimean War influenced how she thought about public health. And so this was a really interesting book in terms of what its perspective is and how it argues that perspective. It does get a little repetitive at points. I will say there are times where Downes repeats himself a lot. It's like, yes, I get it. I get what you're saying. You don't need to say it like a 4th time in this chapter. But it's very, it's a very different way of looking at the history of epidemiology. It's less of a great man perspective and more of that this field's roots are intrinsically tied with some dark shit that white people did. Yeah, so I'd heard about this initially on a bonus episode of This Podcast Will Kill You. It's an epidemiology focused podcast hosted by 2 epidemiologists, Aaron and Aaron, and they were doing, I can't even remember what the bonus episode for this was for, but I'll link it below. And so they had Jim Downes on to kind of talk about this, and it made me very interested. So I was able to get this via interlibrary loan, and yeah, this is very interesting. If you're at all interested in the history of epidemiology, I'd really recommend trying to track down a copy, because there's a lot here, and it's very, like I said, it's a very different perspective than what we normally get. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and yeah, dark but interesting. After that, I finished another nonfiction book, and that was The Gates of Europe, A History of Ukraine by Serhii Plotky. I initially picked this up for the community read hosted by Jess Owens and Angela from Literature Science Alliance. Did not finish it in time for that, but kept persevering. This is kind of a survey history of Ukraine, you know what it says, and it covers like, ancient Ukraine, so like in the time of the Greeks and the Romans to present day, and it's very dense, it's very interesting. I don't really know too much to say, like how much to say about it, because it did take me so long to read. It took me like 2 months. Overall, I did enjoy it. There is a lot here, and a lot does get condensed, so like there's not a whole lot on like Stalinism or like the Soviet period or like World War II. There's like chapters dedicated to each of the period of Stalin and then of World War II. So there's a lot here that just gets put into like, I mean, if we're excluding notes, like 360 pages. So incredibly dense, but very interesting. I would say if you're at all interested in knowing more about what's happening in Ukraine, pick it up. I gave it, 4.25 out of 5 stars. Glad I finally finished it this month, because I am all out of renewals for my interlibrary loan. The second to last book that I read in the month of July was A Lot Like Adios by Alexis Daria. This is the second book in her Primus of Power series, and this book follows Michelle, who we met in the first book, A Lot Like Ola, and her reconnection with childhood best friend Gabriel, who left New York on a baseball scholarship for college, and she hasn't seen him in 13 years. And so this is a second chance romance when Gabe's business partner in his gym reaches out to Michelle to do a marketing plan for them, and he doesn't know Michelle and Gabe's history, and so Michelle's like, I want answers, I need to figure out what happened. And they reconnect, sparks fly, and in the process they kind of work through their own history as well as Gabriel's baggage with his family. So this was fun. I've realized that Alexis Daria is like my ideal beach read author, because her books are very, they do deal occasionally with some dark stuff, but overall they're just very light. And I really like her characters. I like the romances. There are certain elements where with like Latin families, like one of them, like the gossip chain, it's like you tell one person and like unless you specifically swear them secretly, it will be all over the family text chain. Or the fact that like a mom or grandma comes over and the first thing she does is to start cooking, which true story, like happens. Like my grandma comes over and she will start cooking even though I tell her not to. Anyway, what I mean to say is I really enjoyed this. I really liked Gabe and Michelle. I liked their reconnection over fandom, because they were, when they're in high school, co-writing a fic for a science fiction series that got canceled after one season. It gets pretty steamy pretty quick. So this isn't like a lot like Adios, where it's like towards the midpoint where the leads got together. And part of that is just like the history that Gabe and Michelle have, because like they were friends all through high school, like all growing up. So they know each other. They're really familiar with each other. There was sexual tension there. So I liked this. I do wish that we had gotten more with Gabe and his family, because when we start the book, he's estranged. And so I think I would have liked a little bit more like discussion about how the process that his family went through, specifically his father, during that estrangement, because some of the stuff feels really sudden. I don't want to get too spoilery, but for the most part, I did enjoy this. I gave it, I think, a 3.75 or 4 out of 5 stars. I would really recommend this if you're just looking for good contemporary romance. A lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to the 3rd book, which I think is following Ava, who's present in both of the books so far. So really liked this. And then the final book that I read in the month of July was Witchlings, written by Claudia Bell Ortega, narrated by Serena Fiallo. And so this is a middle grade fantasy novel, and it follows a young witchling, Seven Salazar, who it's the night of the ceremony where she will get assigned a coven, and she and her best friend Poppy are determined to get into House Hyacinth and be coven mates and best friends forever. And Seven has her life all planned out. She just wants to make sure that she is not a spare, so someone who isn't assigned a house. And unfortunately, she, along with her bully Valley and new girl Thorn, are spares, and then their coven doesn't close correctly. And so in order to prevent themselves from being forever witchlings, Seven asks to be assigned an impossible task. And so she, Thorn, and Valley have to capture a night beast and save themselves from becoming toads. So this was delightful. I haven't read any of Claudia Bell Ortega's work so far, but Marinez, my name is Marinez, had reviewed this and really loved it, and it had been on my radar for a while, so I got the audiobook, and this was just, it was delightful. I thought the world building was really interesting. So it's set in a town called Ravenskill. There are 12 towns. There's definitely like a socioeconomic critique, because you have the wealthy people who like literally live on a hill, and then you have like Seven, who is more working class, more middle class. You have discussions about not only like class in terms of wealth, but also in terms of power. So the spares are really marginalized in their society. They're open for abuse and exploitation, and they're generally frowned upon, and they're thought to be lesser, even though as the book goes on, we find out that Seven and her friends have access to magic they technically shouldn't have access to, like in terms of how powerful it is. I also like just the casual Latin influence on the world building. So a lot of the spells are in Spanish. There's like, it's very diverse, and it was just, this was so much fun. I really liked also the friendships between Seven and Thorn, and Seven and Valley, and just kind of learning what's going on with Valley. I will say, content warning for parental abuse in this. That is a component of one of the witchling stories. And it does get addressed, and I thought in a really well done way. So yeah, this is delightful. I kind of want to get a physical copy because I definitely want to reread it. There is a 2nd book coming out, I think next year. So really recommend it. Get it for the kids in your life. Read it for yourself. This was just so much fun. I'm really glad I picked this up. I would say, 5 out of 5 stars. Just really good world building, really good characters. The other thing I will say for this that I liked is that the parents are present in this book. Like, Ortega doesn't, kill off the mom. Like, Seven parents, Talisman and Fox, are there for their daughter to help her, support her. Thorne's parents are also great. Valerie's dad is a piece of shit, but her mom is okay. So yeah, this was delightful. It was a great way to end my month of reading. So that was my July in reading, 9 books that I pretty much overall really enjoyed. So yeah, any of them sound interesting to you? Are you also kind of, are you planning on picking any of these up for any of the August readathons? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoy what you see, please like and subscribe. Have a great day. Bye.